The bitter scent of wort clung to my skin like a curse, seeping into my pores with every handful my stepsisters rubbed across my arms. I twisted against the rough floorboards of my servants' quarters, but Jeannie's knee pressed into my spine while Olga's fingers dug into my wrists. The gray-green powder left chalky trails wherever they touched, and beneath the herbal bitterness, something in it burned, not like fire, but like cold, like my very essence being smothered under ice. "Hold still," Jeannie hissed, her breath hot against my ear. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Through the gap beneath my locked door, I could hear the household stirring with preparation. Footsteps on marble. The rustle of silk gowns. Mrs. Cartwright, the head maid, calling orders about which first to pack for the journey to the ceremony grounds. The Smith family was getting ready, everyone except me. "No Alpha will want damaged goods," Olga said, her voice honeyed with false sympathy as she rubbed another handful of wort across my collarbone, "but at least this way you won't embarrass the Smith name by bonding with some lowborn Omega." She leaned closer, and I caught the scent of her expensive perfume, jasmine and amber, everything I wasn't allowed. "Consider it a gift, Vicky. You won't have to face rejection when no one can even smell you." They'd come for me an hour ago, when the house had been too busy to notice two daughters slipping into the servants' wing. I'd been washing my face, preparing for the one night I'd been waiting for since I was old enough to understand what mate bonds meant. The invitation had arrived 3 days prior, delivered by a royal courier in silver and midnight blue. Heavy parchment embossed with the crescent moon seal, addressed to Miss Victoria Miller, not Smith, but my true father's name, the name I wasn't permitted to use in this house. Every unmated wolf in the territory between the ages of 18 and 30 is invited to attend the winter mating ceremony, to be held under the longest night when the moon's power is at its peak. I'd held that invitation like it was made of moonlight itself. For just a moment, standing in the back hallway where the courier had found me scrubbing floors, I'd let myself imagine it. My mother's old cloak, cleaned and mended. The forest path to the ceremony grounds. The possibility that somewhere in that sacred gathering, someone might catch my scent and really know me. See past the servant's dress and work-roughened hands to the wolf inside who'd been waiting, hoping, dreaming for the single chance. Then Jeannie had appeared around the corner. "What's this?" she'd asked, plucking the invitation from my fingers before I could hide it. Oh, how precious. They invited the help. Serena had laughed, reading over her sister's shoulder. "Look, Jeannie. Miss Victoria Miller. They actually think she's one of us." And then they'd exchanged that look, the one I'd learned to recognize over 16 years of living in their shadow. The gleam that meant they'd thought of something new, some fresh cruelty I hadn't anticipated. They'd walked away with my invitation, whispering. Now I knew what they'd planned. I moved to the narrow window of my room, my skin still tacky with the residue of wort they'd finally finished applying. Outside, dusk was bleeding into true night, the winter sky turning that particular shade of deep blue that made the stars look like ice chips scattered across velvet. The Smith estate sprawled below, all stone and elegance, the manicured gardens dusted with early snow. Beyond the iron gates, the forest began, dark and ancient and full of secrets I'd never been allowed to discover. I was 23 years old, and I'd never been permitted to run in those woods. Never been allowed to shift under the full moon. Never been given the freedom other wolves took for granted. My wolf stirred inside me, whimpering. She felt muted now, distant, as though the word had built a wall between us. She'd always been quieter than other wolves I'd sensed, smaller, more careful, as though she'd learned to take up less space in a world that didn't want her. When I'd first shifted at 16, 3 years later than most, my stepmother Elena had watched with such disappointment that I'd felt it like a physical blow. "Weak bloodline," she'd pronounced, her lips pressed thin. I warned Richard this would happen, taking in a stray. The girl's father was nobody, her mother even less. What did you expect? My father. I barely remembered him anymore. Just fragments, strong hands lifting me onto his shoulders, the rumble of his laugh, the way he called me Little Moon and promised I'd be extraordinary someday. He died when I was 7, a hunting accident, they said. My mother followed 6 months later, her heart simply giving up. That's what they told me, anyway. Sometimes I wondered if hearts could break so thoroughly they forgot how to beat. If grief could be a poison that worked slowly, stealing breath by breath until there was nothing left. Richard Smith had married my mother when I was 5, though I only understood later that it had been a political match, my father's minor pack connections useful to a man trying to climb social ranks. He'd seemed kind enough then, in that distant way adults have with children who aren't quite theirs. But after both my parents died, kindness had curdled into obligation, and obligation into resentment. I became the reminder of his first wife's existence. The ghost at the table. The evidence that he'd once made a choice that hadn't benefited him. Elena had brought Jeannie and Olga from her first marriage, 2 daughters as sharp and beautiful as cut crystal and just as cold. They were everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, their wolves powerful enough that I'd felt them even before I'd shifted myself. Jeannie had her mother's calculating intelligence, Olga had mastered cruelty as an art form. And me? I had a room in the servants' wing, a pile of hand-me-down clothes, and work-roughened hands that marked me as surely as any brand. Tonight was the winter mating ceremony. It happened only once a year, under the longest night when the moon's power was at its peak and mate bonds could form with the strength they were meant to have. Missing it meant another year of servitude. Another year of invisibility. But the word powder they'd rubbed into my skin would take 3 days to wash off completely. 3 days before my natural scent would return, before my wolf could be sensed by potential mates. The ceremony began at sundown. It was already dark outside. The key scraped in the lock, and the door swung inward. Mrs. Stephanie stood in the dim hallway, her lined face etched with worry and something fiercer, determination. She was 70 if she was a day, silver-haired and bent from decades of service, but her eyes were sharp as she took in my chalky, powder-stained skin. "Oh, child," she breathed. "I saw them go into your room." I knew, her jaw tightened. "Come with me. Quickly, before anyone returns." She led me through the servants' passages to her own small quarters behind the kitchen. The room smelled of dried herbs and beeswax, bundles hanging from the low ceiling, casting strange shadows in the candlelight. "I was a healer's apprentice," Mrs. Stephanie said, already pulling down jars, her movements practiced despite her age. "Before I came to this house, well, that doesn't matter now. I know what word is, and I know how to break it." She set a mortar and pestle on the table, adding crushed leaves that glowed faintly silver in the low light. Moon petal and silver sage. I've been growing them in my garden for years, waiting for the day those girls went too far. "Can it really work?" My voice came out hoarse. "It will hurt," she warned. But yes. The paste she made looked like liquid starlight. When she applied it to my skin, I understood her warning. It burned, not like fire, but like ice and lightning combined, as though my very nerves were being scoured clean. I bit down on the leather strap she'd given me, tears streaming down my face as she scrubbed away the wort with blessed water drawn from the old well. "Almost done," she murmured. "Almost there, brave girl." When it was over, my skin was pink and raw, hypersensitive to even the air touching it. But I could feel my wolf again, fully, clearly, as though a fog had lifted. Mrs. Stephanie disappeared into her wardrobe and returned with a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. "Your mother left this with me before she died. Made me promise to give it to you when you needed it most." She unfolded the cloth, revealing a simple wool cloak in deep midnight blue, lined with silver thread that caught the candlelight. I think she knew. Somehow, she knew. I took the cloak with shaking hands and wrapped it around my shoulders. The moment the fabric settled against my skin, I caught the scent, faint but unmistakable. Lavender and moonlight. My mother's scent, preserved somehow through all these years, as though she'd woven protection into every thread. Something in my chest cracked open. "Mrs. Stephanie." "No time for tears, child." She glanced at the clock on her mantel. 6:47 p.m. The ceremony grounds are an hour away through the forest. You'll have to run. In wolf form, you might make it faster. The ceremony begins at sundown, but the magic peaks at midnight. She gripped my shoulders, her eyes fierce. Go. You still have time. And Vicky, her voice softened. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become despite everything they've done to break you. I hugged her once, quickly, then slipped out into the winter night. The snow crunched beneath my feet as I ran for the forest, my mother's cloak streaming behind me like wings. I shifted the moment I reached the tree line, my wolf bursting free with a joy that felt like breaking through ice into sunlight. We ran, faster than I'd ever run before, my mother's cloak somehow shifting with me, becoming part of my fur, streaming behind me like captured moonlight. The winter forest blurred past in silver and black. Bare branches clawed at the sky. Snow sprayed beneath my paws. My wolf, newly freed from the wart suppression, ran with desperate energy, as though making up for years of being caged. But with each mile, doubt crept in like frost. What if you're too late? What if no one wants you anyway? What if Jeannie and Olga were right, you are damaged goods? Weak bloodline. Astray. My wolf snarled in disagreement, pushing harder, faster. We are not weak. We are not nothing. The forest thinned, and suddenly I burst into the clearing. I shifted back, my mother's cloak reforming around my shoulders as though it had always been fabric. My lungs burned. My dress, the plain gray servant's dress I'd been wearing when the stepsisters attacked, was damp with snow and clung to my legs. The ceremony grounds stretched before me, vast and ancient. An enormous stone circle dominated the center, each standing stone carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with moonlight. Hundreds of torches blazed against the darkness. Hundreds of wolves filled the space, most had already paired off, golden threads of mate bonds shimmering between them like visible light. Others stood in disappointed clusters near the edge, preparing to leave. My entrance drew immediate attention. Whispers rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. Who is that? She's late. Isn't that the Smith girl? The servant? Look at her dress. Gods, did she run here? A few laughed, soft, cruel sounds that reminded me painfully of my stepsisters. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to run back into the forest and pretend I'd never dared to hope. But my wolf wouldn't let me. She pushed forward, head high, toward the stone circle. Then I saw him. On the raised dais at the center of the circle stood a man who could only be Derek J. Strickland, the Alpha King. He was massive, easily a head taller than any wolf near him, broad-shouldered and powerful, dressed in black leather and furs. A crown of silver and iron rested on his dark hair, which was pulled back to reveal a face all hard angles and sharp edges. Even from this distance, I could sense his power radiating outward like heat from a forge. He'd remained unmated for 20 years. Rejected thousands of hopeful she-wolves. Everyone knew he'd reject tonight's ceremony too. He always did. His head turned sharply in my direction. Gold eyes, pure wolf gold, not human at all, locked onto mine across the distance. The ancient clock tower at the clearing's edge began to chime. 1, 2, 3. The crowd fell utterly silent. 4, 5, 6. I couldn't look away from him. Couldn't breathe. 7, 8, 9. His expression shifted, shock, recognition, something that looked almost like pain. 10, 11, 12. The 12th chime faded into silence. Something inside me broke open. My wolf surged to the surface with a howl that was half joy, half terror, a sound I'd never made before, raw and wild and utterly beyond my control. Golden light erupted from my chest, shooting across the clearing like a blazing arrow, connecting with the Alpha King in a thread so bright it illuminated every face, every stone, every shadow. The crowd gasped as one. The bond. The mate bond. It burned through me like lightning, like recognition, like coming home to a place I'd never been. Every nerve ending sang with it. My wolf keened, ecstatic and terrified in equal measure. Derek J. Strickland went absolutely still. For one heartbeat, too, he simply stared at me, and I watched his carefully controlled expression shatter like glass. His wolf rose to the surface. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands flexed, in the tension that suddenly sang through his massive frame. Then he moved. One step down from the dais. Then another. His movements gained speed, not quite running, but no longer walking either. His eyes never left mine, gold burning with an intensity that should have frightened me but instead made something in my chest answer with its own desperate fire. Moonlight and winter roses. His voice carried across the clearing, rough as gravel, wondering as a prayer. The crowd parted before him like water. I smelled you the moment you entered the forest. He was close now. Close enough that I could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the scars across his knuckles, the way his chest rose and fell with breaths that weren't quite steady. Beneath the traces of wart poison, he continued, his voice dropping lower, meant only for me, beneath your fear, you called to me. 20 years I've waited, and I'd have waited 20 more. But you're here. You're here. The bond pulsed between us, demanding completion. Recognition. Mine, it whispered. Ours. Mate. But the intensity was overwhelming. It burned through my chest like a brand, and with it came every insecurity, every cruel word, every year of being told I was nothing, worth nothing, less than nothing. How could I be this? How could I be his? I wasn't worthy of this. I wasn't. Derek reached for me, gently, so carefully, his hand trembling slightly as though I were made of starlight and might dissolve at too rough a touch. I panicked. My wolf took over, instinct overriding thought. I shifted mid-step, my servant's dress shredding, my mother's cloak pooling in the snow. As a small reddish-brown wolf, I bolted for the forest. No, Derek's anguished cry followed me. Then he shifted. A massive black wolf, easily twice my size, all muscle and power and predator grace. His eyes blazed gold as he pursued, not chasing, I realized dimly, but protecting. Other wolves moved to intercept me, confused, concerned, trying to help their king by stopping the fleeing she-wolf. Derek's snarl shattered the night. The other wolves scattered immediately, ears flat, tails down. The message was unmistakable, mine. My mate. Stand down. I ran into the darkness, and he followed like a shadow, like fate, like something that had been written in the stars long before either of us was born. Derek caught up within minutes, but he didn't force me to stop. He ran beside me instead, his massive black wolf matching my desperate pace, a dark shadow in my peripheral vision. Patient. Protective. Waiting. My legs finally gave out in a snow-covered clearing. I collapsed, sides heaving, and shifted back without meaning to. The cold bit into my bare skin immediately. Derek shifted a heartbeat later, and before I could even think to be afraid, he'd removed his heavy fur-lined cloak and draped it around my shivering form. His hands never touched me, careful, so careful, as though he understood that I needed space even as the bond between us pulsed with want. You're afraid, he said quietly, crouching a few feet away. Not of me. Of this. He gestured between us, where the golden thread still glowed softly in the darkness. I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. I've waited 20 years. His voice was rough with emotion. I rejected every match because none of them were you. I'd begun to think I was broken, that the moon had forgotten me. But she was just waiting. His gold eyes found mine. Now I've found you, and I'll wait 20 more years if that's what you need. But I won't let you go. Not to fear. Not to anyone. I'm not, my voice cracked. I'm not worthy of. Don't. The word was command and plea combined. Don't let their poison speak through your lips. The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the clearing. Multiple sets, crunching through snow. Derek rose instantly, placing himself between me and the forest edge. Richard Smith emerged first, Jeannie and Olga flanking him. All three were dressed in their ceremony finery, silk and fur and jewels that caught the moonlight. Richard's face was arranged in false concern. "There you are, Vicky," he said, as though I were a lost child. "You've caused quite enough embarrassment for one evening. Come home. We'll discuss your outburst privately." Derek's power rolled across the clearing like thunder before a storm. I felt it press against my skin, saw the trees shudder, watched Richard take an involuntary step back. "She's not going anywhere with you." Derek's voice carried alpha command, the kind that couldn't be denied, that made wolves bare their throats automatically. "Not now. Not ever." Richard's expression flickered, fear, then calculation. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, Vicky is my stepdaughter. She's under my household authority. She's covered in the residue of wort powder." Derek's voice went deadly quiet, more dangerous than any shout. "A substance so rare and illegal that its purchase is tracked by royal decree." A figure stepped from the shadows, a tall man with silver at his temples, dressed in the dark blue of the royal guard. "Derek's beta," I realized. "Marcus," Derek said without looking away from Richard. "Show them." The beta unrolled a scroll. "We have records of a wort powder purchase made 3 weeks ago from a licensed dark magic dealer in the Eastern Territories." The buyers, his eyes lifted to Jeannie and Olga, who'd gone pale as death. "Registered under these names." "You tried to prevent your own stepsister from finding her mate," Derek said, each word falling like a judge's gavel. "From bonding. That's not just cruelty. It's a violation of sacred law." Derek's stronghold rose from the mountainside like something from an ancient tale, all stone towers and soaring arches, lit from within by golden light that spilled through tall windows. Despite the winter cold outside, warmth enveloped me the moment we crossed the threshold. "You're sweet," Derek said, leading me up a curved staircase to a door carved with moon phases. Not his chambers, I understood that instinctively. He was giving me space, room to breathe. "Everything you need should be here. If it isn't, tell the staff." The rooms were more luxurious than anything I'd imagined. Soft beds piled with furs. A bathing room with hot water that ran at the turn of a tap. Windows overlooking snow-covered forests that seemed to stretch forever. I slept deeply for the first time in years. Mrs. Stephanie arrived the next morning, brought by Derek's guards. She looked smaller somehow in the grand fortress, but her eyes were fierce as she embraced me. "There's something you need to see, child." She pulled a leather satchel from beneath her cloak and withdrew a stack of yellowed documents. "Your father's true will. I've kept it hidden all these years, waiting for the day you'd be safe enough to claim it." My hands trembled as I unfolded the papers. My father had been wealthy. Property in 3 territories. Investments with merchant guilds. Everything left to me in trust, with Richard Smith named as guardian until I came of age at 18. But there were other documents, forged ones, declaring debts that never existed. Richard had used my inheritance to fund his household, his lifestyle, Elena's expensive tastes. He'd reduced me to servitude while living on my money. For the first time in my life, my wolf surged not in fear but in pure fury. Golden light flickered around me. The windows rattled in their frames. A teacup on the table cracked down the middle. "Good," Derek's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him enter, but he leaned against the frame now, arms crossed, watching me with something like pride. "Get angry. You've earned it." Over the following days, Derek built his case methodically. Marcus and his investigators gathered evidence, testimonies from former Smith household staff, financial records, the wort powder purchase receipts. But more than legal justice, Derek focused on my healing. He assigned me healers who specialized in trauma, who taught me that what had been done to me wasn't my fault. Teachers who educated me in pack law, in my rights as a wolf and as Derek's mate. Trainers who worked with my wolf, helping her grow stronger, more confident. You were suppressed for so long, the head trainer explained. Your wolf adapted by becoming smaller, quieter. But that's not her true nature. She just needs time to remember. Throughout it all, the mate bond hummed between Derek and me, a constant presence, warm and steady. He was patient but present. He took meals with me, walked with me through his private gardens where winter roses somehow bloomed despite the snow. One evening, as we sat by the fire in the library, he told me about his own past. 20 years, he said quietly. 20 years of being told I should choose someone, anyone. That being unmated made me weak, incomplete. I rejected thousands of she-wolves, good women, strong wolves, because none of them felt right. He met my eyes. I thought I was broken. I thought the moon had forgotten me. And now? I whispered. Now I understand. She was just waiting to bring me to you. 6 weeks after the mating ceremony, the great hall of Derek's stronghold filled with witnesses. Representatives from 7 territories occupied the carved benches, alphas and their advisors, pack elders, legal scholars. The vaulted ceiling amplified every whisper, every breath. At the center of it all, the Smith family stood in a roped-off area, their fine clothes now looking shabby under such scrutiny. I stood before them, not as a servant, but as the Alpha King's mate. My hands trembled as I began, but Derek's presence at my side steadied me. The bond between us pulsed with quiet strength. I was 7 when my parents died, I said. Richard Smith became my guardian. He was supposed to protect me. Instead, he took everything my father left me and made me a prisoner in my own home. My voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. I slept in an unheated room in the servants' wing. I ate scraps after the household finished their meals. I was forbidden to shift, forbidden to run, forbidden to be a wolf. I met Richard's eyes. He looked away. And when the mating ceremony invitation came, my one chance at freedom, my stepsisters held me down and rubbed word powder into my skin to ensure no one could ever bond with me. Mrs. Stephanie testified next, her voice cleared despite her age. She produced the empty word containers, medical records of injuries she'd secretly documented and treated over the years, bruises, burns, cuts from accidents that were never accidents. Derek's investigators presented the evidence methodically. The forged debt contracts with Richard's handwriting clearly different from the supposed signatures. My father's true will, authenticated by 3 independent scholars. Financial records showing how Richard had drained my inheritance. Beta Marcus stepped forward with the final damning piece. Purchase records from a licensed dark magic dealer. Wort powder, bought 3 weeks before the ceremony. He looked directly at Jeannie and Olga. Registered under your names. I turned to face my stepsisters directly. You tried to erase me, I said, and my voice rang through the hall. You rubbed that poison into my skin and told me I was nothing, that I deserved nothing. You wanted me to live and die invisible. Golden light flickered at my fingertips, my moon omega power responding to the truth I was finally speaking. But you failed. The moon knew who I was, even when you tried to hide me from her. And she gave me to him, not as a reward, but because I was always worthy. I just couldn't see it through your cruelty. Jeannie's composure shattered. You are nothing, she shrieked, lunging against the rope barrier. You are nothing. A stray, a weakling, how dare you stand there and... Derek's growl shook the hall. Every wolf present felt it in their bones, pure alpha dominance, undeniable and absolute. Jeannie stumbled backward, going silent mid-word. The raw jealousy and hatred on her face were now exposed before everyone. Derek rose to his full height. Richard Smith, Jeannie Smith, Olga Smith. You are found guilty of theft, fraud, illegal use of dark magic, and abuse. His voice carried the weight of law itself. I strip you of your pack standing. I seize all assets obtained through fraud and return them to their rightful owner. I banish you to the border territories, where you will live as the outcasts you made Victoria. He paused, his gold eyes sweeping the assembly. Any who harm her, harm me. Any who shelter the Smiths are enemies of the crown. Then Derek turned to Mrs. Stephanie, his expression softening. Mrs. Stephanie, for your years of silent protection and courage, I grant you a position in the royal household and a pension to ensure your comfort for the rest of your days. The elderly housekeeper's eyes filled with tears as she bowed. Justice, at last, had been served. The winter solstice arrived with the longest night of the year. I stood at my window watching snow fall in thick curtains, feeling the change within me. 6 weeks of healing had transformed me. My wolf was fuller now, more confident, no longer the small, quiet presence that had learned to take up less space. She moved through me with grace and power, finally remembering her true nature. My Moon Omega abilities had been developing under careful guidance. Prophetic dreams came more frequently now, showing me glimpses of futures yet unwritten. I could sense emotions in others, calm distressed wolves with just my presence. Golden light sometimes flickered around my hands when I was deep in feeling. The mate bond hummed constantly between Derek and me, but he'd never pushed. Never demanded. Despite the bond's pull, despite how it burned whenever we were close, he'd refused to complete it fully. Not until you choose me freely, he'd said once. Not out of obligation. Not out of gratitude. Only when you're ready. Tonight, I was ready. I found him in his private chambers, standing before the fire. Snow fell beyond the tall windows, but inside, warmth and firelight made the ancient stone glow amber. Derek. He turned, and the intensity in his gold eyes stole my breath. I choose this, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I choose you. Not because fate decided. Not out of obligation or gratitude. But because I want to. I moved closer. You've been patient. You've protected me. You've helped me remember who I am. Now I want to be yours, completely. Vicky. My name was a prayer on his lips. He closed the distance between us, and when his hands cupped my face, I leaned into his touch. Our kiss was tender at first, then deepening, years of loneliness and longing finally finding answer. The physical union was interwoven with something deeper, spiritual connection, our wolves merging, our souls recognizing each other in a way that went beyond flesh. It was tender and passionate, healing and claiming, everything I'd never dared to dream I could have. As we joined, golden light erupted from my skin, flooding the chamber with luminescence. Derek's mark appeared on my neck, a silver crescent that burned with sweet fire. And on his chest, directly over his heart, my own mark manifested, a rare reciprocal marking that signified perfect equality between mates. Look at us, Derek breathed, wonder in his voice. For the first time since my parents died, I felt complete. Tears streamed down my face, not from pain, but from pure joy, from the overwhelming rightness of this moment. I'm home, I whispered against his skin. Derek held me closer, and I felt moisture on his own cheeks. You are my home, he responded, his voice rough with emotion. You always were. I was just waiting to find you. Later, as we lay together in the firelight, exhaustion and contentment pulling me towards sleep, the vision came. A sanctuary bathed in moonlight. Wolves, broken, scared, lost, finding refuge within its walls. Healers tending wounds both visible and hidden. Children learning they were safe. And at the center of it all, myself, no longer the frightened girl but a beacon of hope. I woke with tears on my face and purpose burning in my chest. I know what I'm meant to do, I told Derek. He smiled, as though he'd been waiting for me to see it. Then let's make it real. 1 year later, the great hall blazed with light. It was the anniversary of the mating ceremony where Derek and I had bonded, where my life had changed forever. But today marked something more, my formal coronation as Luna Queen. The hall overflowed with representatives from all territories. Silver and moonstone decorated every surface, catching the light and throwing it back in cascades of brilliance. I wore a gown of white and silver that flowed like moonlight made fabric. My red hair had been arranged in intricate braids, left loose at the ends to cascade down my back. Derek stood before me, the circlet of silver and moonstone held reverently in his hands. Pride shone in his gold eyes as he placed it on my head. "Luna Queen Victoria," he proclaimed, his voice carrying to every corner. "My mate. My equal. My heart." The assembled wolves bowed as one. I was Luna Queen, not just by mate bond, but by my own merit, my own strength earned through healing and growth. But I didn't simply accept the title and sit down. I stepped forward, and the hall fell silent. "I established today the Moonlight Sanctuary," I announced, my voice clear and unwavering. "The first royal sanctuary for abused, orphaned, and outcast wolves. Any wolf suffering as I once did will have a place of protection, healing, and belonging." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, surprise, approval, curiosity. "I pledge royal resources to this endeavor," I continued. "My personal inheritance, recovered from those who stole it. And my own time, I will not sit in a palace and forget where I came from. I will not let others suffer in silence while I live in comfort." I turned to where Mrs. Stephanie stood, tears already streaming down her weathered face. Mrs. Stephanie will serve as the sanctuary's first director. Her kindness saved me once. Now it will save countless others. The elderly woman bowed, accepting with dignity even as emotion overwhelmed her. The ceremony concluded with the sanctuary's first arrivals, 3 young wolves, rescued from households where they'd been treated as servants, as less than nothing. They stood uncertain at the hall's entrance until I went to them myself. I embraced each one. "You're safe now," I whispered. "You're seen. You're valued." Then I turned back to the assembled crowd, Derek moving to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. "They tried to make me invisible," I said, and my voice rang with power, Moon Omega power, Alpha Queen authority, but most of all, the power of someone who had survived and chosen to transform suffering into hope. "They tried to erase my scent, my worth, my future. But cruelty doesn't get the final word." Golden light flickered around me, soft and warm. "The moon sees every wolf in shadow, and now, so do I. Let this sanctuary stand as proof, you are not what was done to you. You are who you choose to become." The hall erupted in approval, howls and cheers and stamping feet. Later, as the celebration continued inside, Derek and I stepped onto the balcony overlooking our territory. Snow fell gently, dusting the world in white. In the distance, the sanctuary's lights glowed warm against the darkness, already a beacon. Derek's arm wrapped around my waist, and my hand came to rest over my stomach, where new life grew, secret and precious. We hadn't announced it yet, that joy was still just ours. I smiled up at him. "We're going to change everything." He kissed my forehead, his lips lingering there. "We already have, little moon. We already have." And beneath the winter stars, surrounded by falling snow and the warmth of love that had healed every wound, I knew he was right. The girl they'd tried to erase had become a queen. And she would make sure no one else was ever invisible again. The end. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.